And all right. So, we talk about stress a lot, and I've talked about stress, and we know we have all this research into stress, and we know that stress damages, shifts us into a sympathetic state and damages our digestive function, and overdrives our adrenals, and it just does a whole bunch of nasty things to us. And we have all sorts of research on it, but we don't really go into in defining what stress is. And what's funny is that we also don't really talk about the damage that our emotional function does to us. Well, we're just using the different terms. Stress is a combination of three major emotions. There's some more you can put in there, but the three major emotions are sadness, guilt, and fear. Those three emotions are what basically comprise stress. So, like, imagine if you're a salesperson and you're worried about making your quota, or if I don't make these sales, my kids won't eat. That's fear. That's anxiety. Anxiety is fear of the future, and so that's fear. If you're like, man, I've been working too hard, I'm not spending enough time with my kids, I'm not being a good dad. That's guilt. And if you look out at everything that's going on and things aren't where they're supposed to be, you get sad that you haven't become where you need to be, or done the things you feel like you need to do for yourself, your business, your family, your whatever, your purpose. That's it. That's what stress is. It's a combination of emotions that damage us physically, neurologically, biochemically, all of it. So when we start to kind of understand that, yeah, our emotional health is really, really important, because it is the stress that's killing us. That's where we start to kind of really get into the idea of we need to start making major shifts. This is why, like, we've added in all the NLP and all the psych stuff and all the mental work that we do to kind of offset the stress. So a lot of what we've done, or a lot of what I've done to kind of build up the protocols that we have, are to kind of, in a holistic manner, take care of everything. And so when we start talking about, well, what do I need to do, to get my type 2 diabetes under control, or to, get my, get this malaise, or I just feel kind of meh all the time, or PTSD or whatever it is. Well, we've got to fix your gut biochemically. And so we reset it, and everything was great, and people felt awesome, but they wouldn't stay awesome. And what I finally figured out was that we're going to have to start addressing the mental aspect of health if we really ever want to get the gut and the whole body to stay where it's supposed to be, and for us to move into a place of actual wellness, of actual health. So that's when we started looking at things like NLP. So we looked at, I spent a lot of time working with some traditional therapists, psychotherapy, Freudian-based model. The thing I don't like about the Freudian model is, like I've said before, you have to associate into your problem, dwell in your problem, live in your problem, and then maybe have outcomes on the other side. The Adler model deals directly with your unconscious mind. It's like, okay, what is exactly this emotion? What exactly is this problem that we're actually dealing with? And how do we then correct that actual issue? And so that's why I like the Adler model, because it deals directly with the emotions we're dealing with. It also deals with purpose, and it deals with family placement, order placement, that type of thing. And so that side of therapy I like a lot more than we look at when we talk about the Freudian model, mostly because of just the way that your unconscious mind plays into it. And your unconscious mind is basically the programming that we all have. Some of the programming is good for you, some of the programming is bad. And so you got to kind of decipher that out and change it out. But that's what stress is. So stress is going to cause all of your, it's going to drive your adrenals into exhaustion. We're going to start having high, cortisol levels, high homocysteine levels. We're going to start having, more inflammatory issues. That's going to lead into maintaining or creating a situation biochemically where you're going to end up with type 2 diabetes. That's where all of these things live. And this is where we talk about, stress is a major killer and stress is a major problem. We got to deal with stress. Yeah. But until we actually start recognizing what stress really is, we can't really start attacking it. And so that's why it's important that we understand that it is a bundle of emotions. And as long as we maintain the fear, the guilt, and the sadness, we're going to maintain our stress. And I realize the irony of, talking about these issues on social media, where social media is creating or maintaining a lot of these issues. I get that. I get that kind of irony. However, that is one of the things that we need to start to recognize, is that if we don't start doing something to push back against it, this is what's going to help it creep up. And the biggest problem with these is that a lot of these are self-feeding. And what that means is that you start to get scared, or you start to get guilt, you start to feel guilty about something, or whatever. And so you start finding reasons to be guilty, finding reasons to be anxious. If you start focusing on all the places that you've messed up as a parent, just as an example, if you started really looking, you could find things you did every day, like, I should have spent more time with him here. I shouldn't have yelled at him. I should have done this. I should have said that. I should have, like, there's all sorts of shoulda, couldas, or should not have done, or, things like that. That's really easy to find. If you start focusing on the things you did to make you a good parent, here's the great thing. If you do start focusing on the things that you do right, you'll actually do them more, because they're more top of mind. If you start giving yourself credit for the things that you do, you're going to start getting that dopamine click, and you'll be like, oh, I liked that I did that. I'm going to do more of that. And so you actually start solving the problem by recognizing the things about the problem you did right. And so just changing the dynamic and changing the way that you look at it, and what we call it reframing, in NLP, where you look at a problem and you're like, okay, let's look at the other side of it. There's a lot more to that beneficial function than there is to beating yourself up every day, because you can always find something you did wrong. Hell, half the times that, as a parent, I talk to parents about this all the time, you'll think something through and then you'll do it and it won't go the way you thought it did. And you'll be like, I'm a bad parent. And you can beat yourself up like that forever. So I talk to a lot of parents who they focus on that. They focus on the things they did wrong, and they feel like they're a terrible parent. Well, guess what? If you tell yourself you're a bad parent, you're going to end up being a bad parent. You get to dictate that. So that's one of those things that, you're self-driving this. If you're like, oh man, I'm really afraid of, the economy collapsing or World War III or whatever, that's one of those things that you really need to talk to me about, because you can't affect that. And so you need to get out of it, because it is tearing you up. Holding guilt or holding fear that is either irrational or you have no control over is going to damage your health, but it's not going to benefit you or anyone around you, because you can't do anything about it. And I know it's hard. You're like, well, I saw on social media that, I know. Yeah. And it's terrible. There was massive flooding and people died, and that is horrible. And I feel terrible for those people. However, say a prayer and move on. If you're like, well, I guess I shouldn't have, broken the dam. Yeah. That if you had something like that, then yeah, you have responsibility. But if you didn't do that, and it's terrible, and move on. There's a lot of these things that, we feel like we're supposed to hold inside and, really, really let it tear us up, or else we're not feeling, or else we're not people, or else we don't really understand what's going on. There's not a whole lot of reason for you to let yourself get beat up about it. So we do a lot of this stuff to ourselves, and we drive a lot of this stress. And so when you start thinking about, what gives you stress, and you really start boring into it, and I highly recommend you do this with somebody. If you don't have somebody to do this with, this is one of the things we do, bore into it and be like, what is causing the stress? Well, I'm a bad parent. Okay, walk through that, figure it out. Like, here are the things I'm going to do. We set this dynamic, and so we're going to be a good parent. We're going to do all these different things. And that's really, really beneficial. So start moving into that type of a dynamic. It'll help reduce your stress. It'll radically help increase your lifespan. So it's one of those things that, if we can just start to recognize what our stresses are, and then start walking them back, the emotional triggers, the emotional stressors that we have, you're going to be a lot healthier. And so start thinking about this. Start thinking about, like, looks like I have some stress, or I feel like I have some stress, or people tell me I have stress. But start looking throughout your day, and whenever you start realizing, oh, yeah, I did have some feelings of fear, or I did have some feeling, and again, anxiety is fear of the future. So if you're worried about something that has not yet happened, that is fear of the future, that is anxiety. If you're worried about things that are happening right now, that you're not dealing with, if you can't do anything about them, just notate that, and then kind of move on. And if something happens and you feel really bad about it, and there's something you can do about it, or you did your best, let that guilt go, try to learn from it, and just move on. But kind of look at those things and kind of realize maybe you do have more stress than you thought you did. And maybe now that you know where these things are coming from, now you can start making a targeted plan to do something about it and push back against them and get rid of that stress and get rid of that fear, the sadness and the guilt. So if you guys have any questions, hit us up, questions@chalmerswellness.com, or we'll talk to you guys about it later. Have a fantastic day. Thanks for your time.